and welcome back in Studio A. And this has certainly been some memorable talks, and I think the guest that we now have, and are very glad to be welcoming here, is someone who's going to give a lot of value to everyone here. I'm thrilled to be announcing you, Javier, from Google. And the topic of your talk is really UX metrics. And I think so many are struggling with defining the right metrics and implementing them. And yeah, so without further ado, we're all really excited for what you have planned for us. I think this is going to be a memorable talk for everyone. So get your pens out, start typing away. And yeah, thank you for being here. And we're looking forward to your talk.
Sure thing. Thank you. Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Hello, everyone at World Usability Congress. I'm happy to have a couple of minutes to talk to you about a topic that is dear to my heart, which is UX metrics and how you measure the user experience. My name is Javier. I work for Google. Currently, I manage a team of quantitative and qualitative UX researchers at Google Cloud, where we look at our ecosystem, the Google Cloud ecosystem, and how users use our products across the different product suites that we have. Before that, I managed UX research teams for ads at Google and for YouTube. And this is my LinkedIn page if you want to get in contact. So, how do you know if your products are doing well? This is a question that we are being asked often at Google, especially given that Google is moving away for multiple years now from this original launch and iterate philosophy, where you just launch something and then you start iterating on it. And then if it doesn't work, you just stop it, towards a philosophy where we want to launch things that are successful and that users love. And so how do we know that? How do we define success? And so obviously the ask is for success metrics. When do we know? We're like an engineering company. We look at metrics and numbers. That's what we do. And so how do we know that? So having algorithms that measure the performance of our products and that indicate that we're moving in the right direction. So what do companies often do? And so does Google still, and for many years, we measure things that are readily available. So things like page views, clicks, uptime, latency, how many active users do you have, what is the revenue, if you have a revenue generating product, are things that you have at hand and you report it and you look at it. And so that's part of the story. But these metrics show only a fraction of what users actually do in our products and deliver a very incomplete picture. And so the question is, how do we move towards more user-centered metrics, UX success metrics that measure the performance? And that is a topic that my team is working on a lot, moving all of our product teams towards focusing on metrics that, in addition to all the business metrics that we're looking at, deliver a picture on what users are doing on our products. So goal of UX metrics would be that you want to implement and track user-centered metrics for your products, and obviously looking and in line with your company goals or your product goals. And the rationale for that is that we want to know how products are doing and understand this so we can shape the future direction. So we know if we're doing well, we know if we're flat, we know if things are deteriorating, and we are able to take action. We know if we change something or if we launch something, what impact it has on our users through looking at these metrics. And the challenge in this space, if you work in this space, is that metrics are obviously imperfect, like always. No matter what metrics you look at, they're imperfect. And if you choose them poorly, or if you optimize them without regular validation, then your product decisions might go in the wrong direction. So it's really important that you spend a lot of time and thinking and research into figuring out what are the right metrics, and that you validate them over and over again to make sure that you have the right metrics at hand, and that you're not flying in the wrong direction because you're looking at the metrics you shouldn't be looking at. I'll give you an example of what that means, right? If you look at your 30-day actives for your product and it looks like that, is this a happy story? Is this something you think is fine? And it might be, right? You look at that and you're like, we have more and more users in our product, in our system, so apparently we're doing something well. And so you might go like, everything's good, let's continue business as usual, right? Now this metric, these numbers might actually show a totally different picture if you try to understand what they're composed of, right? Because this curve might actually be composed of two different metrics, which one is your new users that are using the system and your existing users that are using the system. And so if you compute them, they will look like the left-hand curve where you say everything is fine. But if you look at these metrics, you go like, okay, we're growing because we're throwing a lot of new users into our funnel, which is a good thing. But we're not growing as fast as we could because we're losing existing users. So apparently we do have something to do to prevent these users from churning. We need to look into the reasons why people are leaving the system and try to figure out if we can tackle that, if we can improve that. And so in one case, if you have the left-hand side metric, you would do nothing. In the right-hand case, you might spin off an effort to understand user churn and how to fix it. And so that's why it's important that you spend a lot of time figuring out what are the right metrics for your product to measure the success. So who's in charge? Who's in charge to create UX metrics? And so my opinion here is clear, like we are. As UX leads, we are in charge to shape user-centric metrics because we are in charge for the user perspective, and we should advocate for looking at the right metrics. That's not as a replacement of business metrics. Obviously, you will always have them. It's as an addition to normal business metrics such as revenue and latency and other things your team might be looking at. So how do we go about that? If you need to approach the creation of UX metrics for your product, what are things that you can do? There's two key concepts that will help you define metrics, which is a goal and a signal. If you think about a metric, then first think about the goal. What is the goal that you want users to do in your product? Like, how do you want them to engage? What are the things that as a business you're expecting them to do? And then in a second step, you think, what is the signal that would indicate a behavior in the right direction? So what are the signals that would indicate you that you're doing well? So have these two things in mind, goal and signal, as one concept of a framework that you can use to approach your UX metric effort. Here's an example of how that was done at Google many years ago for Google.com, for the search engine. So the goal of the team was that users should find what they need on first try. That is an indicator of the search engine doing its job well. And the signal they defined was the length of time before a user comes back to search after clicking a search result, which is an interesting metric if you think about it, because it actually is something that happens off your system, right? But the behavior here is clear. If you click on a search result and you don't come back quickly, that means that we sent you to the right place, and we suppose this is a good thing for a search engine to show you what you're looking for very quickly, and you don't have to come back and click many other results. So that's an example of how this framework can be used to define a UX metric. And so when you go about thinking through your metrics, there is another framework that Google published, which is called the HEART framework, which hopefully many of you know already, which helps you to think through different type of UX signals, UX metrics that will give you a complete picture of what users are doing on your products. And it's called HEART because you have like 5 sections, 5 buckets of metrics: happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success. And so happiness are the normal indicators that we do through surveys, for instance, where we ask people how satisfied they are with the products, but can be other things, signals that indicate users are happy with your product. Engagement means that our users are interacting with our product, are exploring the different things that our products use, so they're engaging with it. Adoption means we get new users for our products and services. Retention means we keep them in our users, in our products. And task success means that they can do what they want without an effort and effectively, so they can reach what they're here to do. And if you want to look at the full paper about that framework, there is a Go link here. I'll show it in the end again. So how would that look like if we apply HEART to a product theoretically? And so imagine you're in charge for a music streaming app. That's just a random example. And you map the HEART framework to goal and signals, as I mentioned to you before. So H would be happiness, and that means people are enjoy using your app. What signals could indicate that they actually enjoy using your app? You could run in-product surveys and ask them how satisfied they are with your product. But there's other things you could do. It's not the only way, right? You can, maybe you have a recommender feature in your product where they can recommend the app to someone else, and that they would usually only do if they're happy with your product. Or you can look at the App Store ratings, which is something you get from another channel. So, and you can come up with other examples. These are only examples of signals that would indicate happiness. If you think about engagement, which means people use your app often, you can look at the time that they spend listening music. That's engaging with your app, right? Or you could look at the number of playlists that they created within your app, which means they're using one of the features to tailor the app to their needs. Adoption means people are starting using the app. What signals could we have there? Classical signals such as we have new numbers of users, maybe new numbers of free tier users if you have a free tier. But you could also look at the numbers of people moving from free tier to pay tier, because that's the adoption of the paid tier. So that's also an adoption metric. On retention means they keep using it. So you can look at also classical numbers such as 7-day actives, or you can look at how many people delete the app from their phones or tablets. Or last but not least, task success. Can they do what they want successfully? So you can look, for instance, into search, how they're using search and how many of those searches translate into music streams, which would be a task success if they don't have to keep searching over and over again, never find what they want. Or you can also say, like, adding new songs to playlists is a success, right? So they successfully tailor these playlists to what they need. So these are just examples, and that a framework like that, like this matrix, helps you to think through the different aspects of how users interact with your products and what signals could actually indicate that you're moving in the right direction. A very important thing is here, why do you do that, right? Why don't you say, well, I measure only happiness? That's right. If I know my people are happy, I don't care about all the other things, right? So why do you need multiple metrics? And so this is all about triangulation. If we get a lot of different metrics, we make sure we don't fall into the trap that I showed you in the beginning with the 30-day active users. We make sure we get a complete picture. So I'll give you an example here. Let's say you're running this music app and you have 2 versions. A is the one that is out there, and B is a new version you're working on which you're launching to a subset of users to run an A/B test, right? And so if you look at revenue, you know a certain amount of users have that new version, and the revenue looks fine. If you look at the curves, it looks more or less the same between two versions. So you think everything's fine, right? But then you look at satisfaction and you realize, oh, something is weird, right? When we launched version B, people were less happy, which is expected. Change a version, then they got to know how to use it, and so the satisfaction increased, and it was on par with the old version, but then it went down again. So something is weird here, and we don't want to launch a product where people are less satisfied than before. That's not a success. Even if revenue is the same, who knows how that plays out later on in the game, right? If you look at adoption, you were like, well, adoption is the same. There is no difference. So we have new people coming into the system, so that can't be the reason, right? And then you might look at task success for searches, and you suddenly see something like that, right? So you're like successful search translates into a music stream, and you realize that it was even a little bit better than version A for a while, but then it went down. Maybe you have a bug. Maybe something in the UI, the search UI, isn't working as users expected, right? And so whatever you did there led to a decrease in task success, which then led to a decrease in satisfaction, right? And so you want to tackle that. And only by triangulating all these metrics, you can get to that insight and make sure you're moving in the right direction. So it's important when you think about metrics that you choose signals that indicate a goal success, right? Not just what you have at hand. That's something that you might encounter often when you work on this. When you define the signals, when somebody will say, "Oh, we don't have that, right? Why don't we pick this other thing that we already have?" So think about this carefully and evaluate if that other signal is really the same and it's really indicating success. Developing UX metrics actually means you often have to instrument new things. You have to measure things you weren't measuring before, which means eng effort, which means like putting cycles into it to have the right metrics. That's not a problem. It's working as intended because most often we're not measuring these things before. Then if you think about the HEART framework, a question I get a lot is like, do I need metrics for all these categories? And the answer is no, you don't. Sometimes you might have a product where a category makes no sense. I don't know, imagine you're working for an internal product and you have forced usage. Everyone needs to use it. Do you need to measure adoption? No, it's not important to you, so you leave it out. Maybe you don't have enough time to tackle all of that at once, and so you focus first on 2 or 3 of those buckets that are more important to you, and then you go from there. So it's not important to have all of them and not important to have all of them at once. Then you also don't need multiple metrics per category, multiple signals, right? You can only have one if that makes sense to you, right? I showed you a couple of examples before. Doesn't mean you have to have that always. And then, very important, and I can't stress this enough, UX metrics are only useful if you use them, right? Measuring something to have it in a dashboard and think that it's fancy is useless. So you need to build in a process into your business reviews where you look at those metrics. I'm sure you will have a business review where you look at revenue or other similar metrics that your business cares about. So UX metrics reviews need to be built into these. So next to looking at whatever revenue metrics you look at or other things, you also look at UX metrics and you discuss as a team, are there any actions we need to define based on those metrics? If you work in this field, don't forget about 2 important laws. There is Pearson's law that says that which is measured improves, and that which is measured and reported improves exponentially. So know, what does that mean? Know that if you measure something, it will improve through time because you're using it, right, to define actions, and it will improve through time. And there might be a moment in time where you figure that metric is no more helpful, right? Maybe you reach a ceiling effect, or maybe other things are more important to the business. So metrics need to be revised frequently. You need to ask yourself in a regular cadence, are these the right metrics? Or do we need to add something? Do we need to remove something? And that goes along with Goodhart's law, which says when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So be careful to define targets for those metrics. That's something that product asks a lot for. Like if we show, for instance, satisfaction metrics, it's like, okay, what is the target satisfaction we should aim at, right? If you have low satisfaction, of course you should have an effort to try to improve satisfaction, right? But putting a target on that and then working towards that over and over again will lead you exactly to the problems before, or might lead you to optimize for one metric and sacrificing another one. So all these metrics are in an ecosystem, and together they show the health of how users are doing with their products. And so be careful with targets. I'm not saying you should ever have a target, but don't make this like a default for all the metrics you define to then go like, okay, we need to improve 5%, quarter over quarter. That doesn't make sense. And that's why you need to revisit your metrics and adapt and iterate on. That was it. That was my spiel on UX metrics. I hope you found any of this useful. There's a couple of resources here, especially regarding the hard metrics. There's blog posts, there's scientific publication, and also there is like a tutorial that helps you to think through that. So you can go to these links and see if that is helpful to you. And I'm open for questions.
Yes, thank you so much. We do value your time also, knowing that it's a very busy time for you. You're leading the UX research department for the Google Cloud platform. So we know, we appreciate the time. And in fact, there were some questions. So I'm just gonna dig in, and one question, Sandeep Sangana, sorry if I'm not pronouncing names here right. As a B2B company, we're very detached from our users. How do you have success metrics or KPIs earlier on?
So I remember a mentor for me saying, like, even if you're in the B2B space, even if you're developing products for internal users, these are users too, right? So, okay, I understand if you develop a B2B product and you have no access to how they're using this, the products, then that might be actually sometimes complicated. So I can't speak for that concrete case. Sometimes your products are being used in a specific way. There's things you can look at, like that residuals of behavior. If you can't do any of that, then looking into defining metrics such as like satisfaction surveys or other things might be the only way to go. So I don't know this concrete case. In most cases, I have worked in B2B context, we were able to look at behavioral metrics in an aggregated form, in anonymized form. So I'd encourage you to look into if there's anything on a contractual basis that you can do to get to reasonable metrics.
Yes, thank you for that. And then one more question, and you are gonna review the questions later on, so don't worry if your question's not being answered here. I'm just looking at the ones that are rated the most. So the second question is, in a B2B context also, where the user is not the client, how can adoption and retention be measured? Are they still relevant if the users are not decision makers in the buying process?
Yeah, that is a good question. So I think there's cases where adoption retention makes no sense. So I always use the simple example of a tax declaration software that you have to use, right? If you have to do taxes, there's no way you get around that, so you will have to use it. So adoption retention makes zero sense. In that case, don't measure it, right? If you know that you have forced usage, then don't do it. In many of those B2B cases, though, users have alternatives, or they can choose to use your products or not. So if that is the case, it might still make sense to look at it.
All right. Thank you so much. Our time is up. Thank you for taking the time. That was a lot of value. We hope you got value from it as well. And Javier, I'm wishing you a beautiful day today, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye, and our panel starts in a few minutes.